Patrick Hicks Music Stories presents Every Grammys Ever, the 11th Annual Grammy Awards, March 12th, 1969.
Tonight, from Hollywood, New York, and London, IMAX and the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences proudly present the Best on Record, the annual Grammy Awards show.
The first thing that really jumps out to me about this year's awards were the performances. I'm focused more on the nominees and the winners of the awards, but the performances are a really important part of the show. And this year's lineup was amazing. You had the Temptations performing the song Cloud 9, which isn't one of their most well-known songs, but it does have the dubious distinction of being the first Motown song to win a Grammy. That's right, not until this 1968 song did any Motown song win a Grammy. And I think that's actually the greatest indication yet of the Grammys' biases. There's of course racism and sexism at play that's still a problem in the Grammys today, but early on I don't think that was even their biggest problem. They'd given plenty of awards to people of color and to women. I think that the Grammys' biggest flaw and their greatest bias was against music that was new. Changing trends in music just moved too fast for the Grammys. By the time they caught up to new genres and innovations, they'd already missed out on giving Grammys to some of the most important artists in the genre. And their bias against Motown is a great example. The Supremes never won a Grammy. Marvin Gaye didn't win one until 1983. Smokey Robinson didn't win one until 1988. And here you have the Temptations, who didn't win for My Girl or Ain't Too Proud to Beg. Instead, they win for the song Cloud 9. I think it's one of the Grammys' biggest blind spots. Okay, what was I talking about? Oh, the performances. Glenn Campbell did Wichita Lineman, Dionne Warwick with Do You Know the Way to San Jose, Simon and Garfunkel did Mrs. Robinson, the cast of Hair performed Age of Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In, and the Beatles performed Hey Jude. It's such a great lineup, and I think it almost captures the music of the 1960s better than looking at what won Grammys in that decade. And as if to prove the point, one of the lesser-known performers that night was O.C. Smith, who performed the song Little Green Apples, which was a big hit. It had sold 1 million copies in 1968, and it went to number 2 on the charts. But I mention it because that song won Song of the Year that year, beating out songs like Hey Jude by the Beatles and Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel.
Oh, God didn't make little green apples, it don't snow in Minneapolis when the winter comes.
Mrs. Robinson did get a redemption win that year in the Record of the Year category, which was presented to them by Henry Mancini, who was nominationless for a second year in a row. One interesting thing about Record of the Year this year is that it wasn't actually announced live. They saved the announcement for who actually won for the NBC Record of the Year special. People in the room did not like this and booed, and it seems like it was pretty annoying to sit through because they actually filmed each person winning and they filmed 5 acceptance speeches, and then people didn't find out until 2 months later that Mrs. Robinson had actually won. Another performer that night was the Puerto Rican musician Jose Feliciano, doing his cover of The Doors' Light My Fire. The Doors, by the way, never won a Grammy, but Jose ends up winning for Best New Artist, beating out O.C. Smith and Cream. And now the nominees for Album of the Year. Simon and Garfunkel get their first Album of the Year nomination with the album Bookends. Jose Feliciano is nominated for Feliciano. Glenn Campbell is nominated for By the Time I Get to Phoenix. Richard Harris is nominated for the album A Tramp Shining. And if you're wondering, is this the same Richard Harris who became an actor and played Dumbledore in Harry Potter? Yes, it is. He was also a singer. And lastly, the Beatles are nominated for the album Magical Mystery Tour. But before we get to the winner, let's talk about some other albums that were released in 1968. You have Aretha Franklin, Lady Soul. She did win an award this year for the song Chain of Fools, but nothing for this album. You have Jimi Hendrix, Electric Ladyland. At this point, Jimi Hendrix has not gotten a single Grammy nomination. You have the Zombies, The Odyssey and the Oracle. The Faces, Ogden's Nut Gone Flake. Johnny Cash's At Folsom Prison. It got 2 wins, but nothing in the major categories. You have the Rolling Stones album Beggar's Banquet. Now, the consensus is that the Stones were just too rough around the edges for the Grammys, but the snubs for the Stones from here on out are just completely egregious. They're going on a run of some of the most classic albums in music history, and they won't even sniff a nomination for another decade. And the Album of the Year Grammy goes to...
By the time I get to man, Phoenix, I swear, man, tonight's the best I can do for you.
He'll probably leave a note right on the door.
Glenn Campbell's By the Time I Get to Phoenix. This is considered the first country album to ever win Album of the Year. Also, an interesting thing about this album is that the title track, By the Time I Get to Phoenix, it was released as a single a few months before the album. So that song was actually nominated for Song and Record of the Year at last year's Grammys. But the album wins this year. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time for the highs and lows of the 12th Annual Grammy Awards in 1970.
I am a lineman for the county, and I drive the main road.